Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. It's traditional for the British Foreign Secretary to speak at the Lord Mayor of London's Easter banquet on a broad range of international affairs. This year, however, James cleverly decided to focus on only one topic. Britain is watching its economy shrink. In fact, according to the IMF, Britain is likely to be the worst performing of all advanced and emerging economies. Even heavily sanctioned Russia is expected to perform better. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, might well suggest that it's the job of the Chancellor of the Exchequer to worry about that. But without their empire and no longer part of the EU, it's the Foreign Secretary who is responsible, as they say in the UK, for bringing home the bacon. Coincidentally, 60% of which is imported mostly from Denmark. In 2017, Britain hoped to strike deals with China and the USA. Obama had made it clear that a post-Brexit UK would need to wait its turn for a free trade agreement. But in 2021, the USA let the UK down badly when Biden met with PM Johnson and played down the idea of the UK joining the North American Trade Pact, the USMCA. This left Britain in a dire position. It doesn't have the deal it wants with its special relationship partner, and it doesn't have the trade it once had with the EU. Exports to the EU were 55% of the UK's total and are now reduced to 42%. China is probably the only answer for them. Under PM David Cameron in 2015, China and the UK had a golden age. Later reports suggested that Brexit Britain would look to China. All that changed. 2015 may be only 8 years ago, but in British politics that's a long time. So long we've seen 5 PMs and 5 foreign secretaries since. The UK has been mired in scandals, allegations of corruption and mismanagement, and with a declining economy, all the while China has shown remarkable stability, steady growth. It's retained its position as the world's strongest economy, and it's been led through these tumultuous times by a stable government with changes only made when they were expected to be made. So it's no surprise that Cleverly wanted to focus on China for most of his speech. Unfortunately, he did little more than insult the very friends that he wants to cultivate. The speech started well, with one exception. Cleverly referred to the Great Famine as Mao's famine. Some of Mao's policies may very well have contributed, but let's leave that to the historians. Western embargoes, which lasted from 1949 to 1972, surely contributed. China was accused of inefficient policies, but it must also be remembered that the country was only 10 years old, still reeling from a devastating civil war and years of KMT corruption and mismanagement. The worst flooding in a generation hit the Yellow River, and that needed over 2 million laborers to save lives. But while they were doing this, they weren't tending farms. 2 years of drought also contributed. Cleverly either doesn't understand, or perhaps he does, and if he does, this was a deliberate insult to Mao's memory and China generally. Not all was insulting. He went on to state, a stable, peaceful, and prosperous China is good for Britain and good for the world. But he immediately went off the good stuff and onto the headline-generating rhetoric of China's declining and aging population, suggesting it could impact future growth. It could, but again he demonstrated a lack of understanding of China's strategy to overcome these issues. Huge investments in education, infrastructure, long-term planning as set out in a 2019 plan. And one wonders if Cleverly's researchers have even bothered to look beyond headlines at what China is doing. Giving up on dialogue with China would equate to giving up on addressing humanity's greatest problems, Cleverly quite rightly asserted. Then he goes on to insult China again for being the world's worst polluter, without any nod to the fact that the developing world, including the UK, has for 50 years outsourced its carbon-emitting manufacturing to China, a country with 26 times more people than the UK, creating 28% of all the world's goods, compared to the UK's 1.8%. Nor does he mention all that China does and continues to do to alleviate the problem. Insult follows insult. We've already learned to our cost how China's handling of a pandemic can affect the entire world, he said. Cleverly's advisors have misinformed him. He says China's government represents a ruthless, authoritarian tradition. And one has to wonder if this is coming from his ambassador on the ground in China, or from advisors in Whitehall who have never set foot in China but have read Washington-sponsored academic or media reports. But to use Cleverly's own words, it's utterly at odds with the truth on the ground. He uses the word abhorrence to describe Beijing's abuses, but then goes on to state that history teaches us that repression at home often translates to aggression abroad, giving no example of this history lesson. But it's clearly not China he's referring to. There's no such history of aggression abroad or even proven repression at home. He insults China once again by saying they've dismantled the freedoms of Hong Kong, which has been well proven to be wrong by no less than the British barrister Grenville Cross, who was Director of Public Prosecutions in Hong Kong and still resides there. Britain's approach to China, Cleverly says, has 3 pillars. First, Britain will strengthen its national security protections. Second, the UK will deepen cooperation and strengthen alignment with friends and partners in the Indo-Pacific and across the world, with an aim to bolster collective security and deepen commercial links. On this topic, Cleverly asks, why is China making colossal investments in defense? And if he doesn't know the answer to that, then he's displaying a gross ignorance of history and the current reality. He's not that ignorant, is he? The third pillar, he states, is to engage directly with China to preserve and to create open, constructive, and stable relations reflecting China's global importance. That's okay. But, he says, we don't want the long arm of the Chinese Communist Party reaching towards the central nervous system of our country. These 3 pillars seem more adversarial than conciliatory, maybe even imperial, as Cleverly suggests several times that Britain needs to influence decisions made in China. It's possible the elites of London still believe they wield that sort of influence, but it's clear globally that Britain does not. Cleverly's approach to handling China may sit well with the London establishment, but if he's hoping for an invite to Beijing, then he needs to gain a better understanding of both China and the meaning of the word diplomacy. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll speak to you again soon. See you next time.